Hello everyone, welcome back to another Subaru engine video. In today's video I'm going to be showing you the steps on replacing and putting on the new head gaskets and the heads. For this engine I'm going to be reusing the head bolts instead of buying new ones, which if you do reuse the head bolts it'll be a different torquing procedure than if you buy new ones, because the new ones have to have a special torquing procedure to stretch them. So first, let's get to cleaning the block here. So to clean the block by hand, I use a rag and either brake cleaner or lacquer thinner, some kind of cleaner to wipe down the surfaces. And then for things that are still stuck on the surface, you can carefully use a razor blade to scrape off anything that sticks on. So using a rag and brake parts cleaner, just start wiping down these surfaces. As you can see here, this is not coming off easily, so I'm going to use the razor blade on that. When using a razor blade, a lot of people will drag backwards to be safe. If you do go forward, you want to be careful. With even pressure in the middle, just gently peel it off. If you put too much pressure on one side, you might start digging into the metal in other places, which is not what you want to be doing. Just like that. Now cleaning this block is going to take some time, so I'm not going to show you the entire process, but ideally you want it to be a nice smooth finish. If you can get a nice shiny metal surface is good, but depending on what you're dealing with on your block, that might not be possible. Discoloration is fine. Just rub your fingers over it, and if it feels nice and smooth and you don't feel any edges, then it's probably good. I've had blocks that do have small amounts of pitting on the blocking surface. That is also fine as long as it's not major pits. An abrasive you can use on the block is Scotch-Brite pad, so I'd recommend doing it by hand and brake parts cleaner. A cleaner of your choice, and just lightly scrubbing the surface off. Alright, once you got the head surface clean, go ahead and tilt up your engine upright like this. Before you do so, if you were scrubbing, you should probably clean out the interior. So spray with the head pointed down towards the floor, spray up the brake cleaner into your block here, and that way any materials and debris that fell into your engine, that brake cleaner should wash it out. And then once you believe you got the surface nice and clean, go ahead and inspect it real quick, make sure there's no surfaces of the head gasket still on there. There is some pitting surfaces right here as well as here on the lower block, but that's fine. This is the second engine I've worked on that's had pitting. It seems to be a normal thing once they get high mileage. That'll be okay. Just make sure there's no large amounts of gasket material still on here. This discoloration here, as well as here, is outside of the gasket's range, so I didn't really worry about this too much here. But it looks like we are ready to go. The most important areas are around the cylinder walls, and these are nice and smooth, minus the pitted areas. So once you got that clean, we're going to take some oil and we're going to put some oil down into where our bolts are going to be going here. So just lube this up with oil. Next you want to dump the oil out of there. So just turn your engine down towards the floor. Drain the oil out of the bolt holes that you just put it into. Once the oil is drained out of the bolt holes, rotate it back upward. Then use a rag and some parts cleaner to wipe off any oil residue on the surfaces. You want this surface to be clean, oil-free. When you're wiping the surfaces, make sure to wipe inside the cylinder walls. You can also use compressed air to blow out the cylinder walls. And then give it a quick wipe down once again, and then we'll be ready to put the head gasket on. Now carefully take your new head gasket and align it up correctly. It only should go on one way. Like so. Carefully take the new head and line it up with the dowels. sits on there just like that. Next, you want to put some oil on the threads of the bolts and drop them in. You also want to put some oil on this top plate here, this built-in washer. So just put a little oil on top of there. Now you can just cinch it down to the block. That's all you have to do for now, just without tightening it. Also, if you're reusing the bolts, make sure they go back in the exact place that they originally came from. Now we are ready to start the torque process. So we have 6 head bolts. We have to torque these down in sequence. So the sequence is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now we're going to begin by torquing all of them to 11 foot-pounds. And this torque wrench, I have to be careful because at such a low setting, it doesn't click, it just barely gives out. So pay attention to that depending on your torque wrench. And 4. There. And 5. And 6. Now repeat that same order over and over again at 11 foot-pounds until they're all cinched down. Next, we torque bolts 1 and 2 to 25 foot-pounds. There's our click. So after torquing these 2 bolts to 25 foot-pounds in sequence, now we're going to turn every bolt 90 degrees. So if you don't have one of those fancy torque wrenches that tell you when you're at 90 degrees, you can buy yourself a torque angle gauge, which attaches to your normal torque wrench or your bar here, breaker bar. Or you can do what I do, and you mark the top of the bolts. I put a little mark on the top of the bolt, and then I turn it 90 degrees. That way I know where it's at. That popping sound is why you're supposed to lube up the bolts so that doesn't happen, but it's still happening, so that's unfortunate. After you do it all in sequence, do it again to all 6 bolts, turn them an additional 90 degrees in order. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. I forgot to mention these bolts are 14 millimeters, but if you watched my last video, you already knew that. Just like that, the new head's on. Next we're going to put engine assembly lube on the cams and the lifters. Now we'll drop the cams in. I'll put just a tiny bit more assembly lube on the ends here. Put these back on. The forward arrow points in the direction of the front of the engine, so remember that. So for these front ones that are going up here, you have to use ultra gray or ultra black, and that'll create a nice sealant around these flat edges here around the bolts before you can bolt this on. So put it on the surface. So since these end surfaces are getting sealed with ultra black or ultra gray, you want to make sure that they're nice and clean and free of oil. So go ahead and give them a quick wipe down on these surfaces here. You'll also want to do the same thing to the bottom of the mating surface. So clean this off, because this is where you're going to be putting your ultra black or ultra gray, whatever sealant you use. Make sure the old stuff's peeled off. If need be, you can use a razor blade to help remove the stuff that's stuck on here still, the old gasket material. Just gently peel it off, and it should just wipe off. There's another one here. As simple as that. So just put a thin coating of your ultra black on the surface there, and careful not to get it in the surface of the metal. Put the bolts through as a help you guide your way in there, and then cinch them down. And the last one. And cinch it down. Alright, so next we're going to torque these all down. And something I should have mentioned earlier, when you put all these on, make sure to give them a nice wipe down, get all the old oil, any debris that are on these braces here for the cams, so they're nice and clean. And then of course put assembly lube on there for pre-startup. I'll also be priming the engine before firing it up once it's back in the Subaru. So next we're going to be torquing these bolts down to 89 inch-pounds. I also do this in sequence. I'll do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Again, 89 inch-pounds. These are 10 millimeters. And then I'll check again. Alright, now for the upper one. And then I'll do one more cycle through to make sure. And there we go. Now we put on the valve cover, the new valve cover gasket, and then the gaskets that go around the spark plugs. Then for the valve cover bolt, put on your new grommets, slide them into place, and then bolt down your valve cover. 44 inch-pounds for the valve cover bolts. And then one more cycle through the check. And we are done with this side of the engine. Now on to the other side, same process. Alright, now it's time to do the other side. So I just want to show you real quick, get a close-in image of this surface. This is about how clean it should be. Now I was actually able to get this side looking cleaner than the other head just because of the discoloration. You can see right there, there's a little bit of discoloration and there's actually a little bit of pitting right there. But that's okay. That'll be fine. The other head surface had more discoloration than this, but as long as you got it smooth and you can't feel any ridges of the old head gasket material, then it should be good to go. Just make sure you get a nice smooth surface and as clean as possible. But the more important thing, besides it being clean, is that it's level and flat. You can get feeler gauges and special tools to do that. So I already cleaned out the block surface. I sprayed brake cleaner in here to clean out the passages, and then I oiled the bolt where the head bolts are going. I already dumped out the oil, so now I'm just going to do a quick use some air compressor to blow out any residual oil and debris. I'll just give it a quick wipe down because, again, you want to make sure the mating surface for the head gasket and the heads is nice and clean. No oil, nothing. Use like a brake cleaner too to wipe this down really good. Make sure there is no oil residue anywhere. Take as long as you want when doing this job. Don't do it quick because you do not want to be redoing this job. This is one of those few things that it's better to do it right the first time because it is a pain to do it again. I'm going to do one quick pre-check. Looks nice and clean. Alright, I'm ready to set this onto the head, our multi-layered steel head gasket. Again, there's only one way this can go on, so just pay attention to that. And you just line it up with the dowels. And there we go, head gasket is on. We're all done. We have our nice clean heads right here. Took it to the machine shop. They do an amazing job. Highly recommend you do the same for yours to get that nice clean surface. Now just carefully line it up with the dowels. There we go. Again, I'm going to be reusing these bolts, so make sure the threads are not damaged and that they're nice and clean and ready to go. I usually just use like brake cleaner to clean them off, give them a really good wipe down. Then I use compressed air to blow off the threads. Don't use any abrasive measures like a heavy brush or a wire wheel because that can damage the threads, which then can mess up how it holds under torque load. And you don't want that. So if you're going to be reusing these old bolts, just use a nice rag and some cleaner to clean off the threads. Don't use any hard abrasive materials to clean this. Alright, now we're ready to torque down the head bolts. Again, there's a sequence to this, and we start off with 11 foot-pounds of torque. We go in sequence of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So let me start here. It's 11 foot-pounds. And there it is. There. Since this is a low setting on my torque wrench, it's not going to make a loud click. It'll just be a very subtle give. So go nice and slow depending on what you're using. Right there, it gave. And just so if you don't want to memorize the torque sequence, I have a sheet of paper and I have it written down. That way I always know. There it is. Right there. And 6. Now they're all 11 foot-pounds, but do this several times, repeat the sequence to make sure they're all even torqued. It's kind of like when you're putting on a tire. As you tighten one lug nut, it loosens another. Same with the head bolts, so double check. So again, that's bolts 1 and 2, the 25 foot-pounds. Again, this is a 14 millimeter socket. 12 point. So 25 foot-pounds. There we go, 25. Double check that again. Yep, that's 25. 25. Next is it's time to torque the bolts in 90-degree sequences. Now, if you don't have one of those fancy torque wrenches like I mentioned earlier, or one of those gauges to attach to your wrench, you can just mark the bolts. Simple as that. So just carefully mark them. I just use one of these little markers and you just carefully mark the top of the bolt. I'll show you up close this time. So just like that, I put a little white mark right on top of the bolt. Make sure you mark it right at the top of the bolt so you understand when it's 90 degrees. This is doing it by eye. And if you mark the bolt and it doesn't look right, before you turn the bolt, erase the mark and redo it. Again, in sequence now, I'm going to rotate these 90 degrees. Five. Alright, so after you do that all in sequence, turning it 90 degrees, you'll want to do it again. So an additional 90 degrees, again, following the sequence. So I'm going to do a final pre-inspection of my marks here, just to make sure everything looks good, because after doing 2 sets of 90 in total, that's 180 degrees, so it should be pointing in the complete opposite direction of where you marked it previously. So 1 looks good to me, 2 looks good, 3 looks good, 4 looks good, 5, maybe 6 can just go a little bit more. And then it should be perfect. And 6, there we go. And the head bolts are successfully torqued on. This means we're ready to put the cams on. So clean up the surfaces where the cams are going to be sitting, as well as the valve covers. Now we can put the cams on. Just like that. Again, make sure not to mix up your cams. They are different. There we go. I can put these collars back on. I'm going to put a little bit more, just tiny amount right on here. There's already some underneath, so you don't need a whole lot. There we go. Okay, now we can put these little brackets back on. Make sure the surfaces are clean when you do this. Again, with the brackets on the end, put a little bit of a small amount of ultra gray or ultra black. I recommend ultra black because it's made for oil. And put it on. And the top one. Run down and cinch it. So 89 inch-pounds. And this is a 10 millimeter socket. It's just simple as that. Just like that's done, then I double check it. And that is done. Now ready for the valve cover. The valve cover just pops right in. There's little slots, so it only goes one way, and you can't mix them up that way with the other valve cover. So you put also these gaskets around the spark plug openings. It just pops on down. Install the new grommets on the valve cover bolts, and then torque it to 44 inch-pounds, and then you'll be good to go. Alright, so now we're putting in the cam seals. So there's 4 of these. They just slip right over the cams. Put some oil on the outside edge and the inside ring. This will help with the install with it sliding on. You want to be careful so the inner lip doesn't bend in or fold on itself, but you just gently slide it in. There might be a little bit of resistance at first, but just pop it over gently, like that. And then you just slowly work it in towards the housing. And then eventually it'll stop. Now, you can use a special tool to put this in, which means you'll have to buy one. You can also use a socket, but I just like to use a small hammer and just an extension. Make sure, if you use an extension, make sure it's nice and smooth so it doesn't damage it. I don't have a special tool, and I've used the socket method where you get an entire socket to slide over the edge. And I actually did it just with this engine where I was doing that, but it jammed it in crooked and sideways, so I had to reopen up the engine to fix that problem, which cost me time, and I had to redo some of my work. So if you use this method, it's much more, it's less likely for you to mess up, and especially if you're careful. So you just gently work it in there by hand first, just to get it barely holding on. You'll feel it resisting. Don't force it in by hand, because then you'll likely get it in there crooked as well. But you just kind of look at it, find the end that's sticking out the most, and you just put the extension on there, and you just lightly start tapping it. See how it pops? Just be nice and gentle. And eventually it'll bite enough where it stays in all on its own. There it goes. Once you know it's in there and it's staying in there where it's not popping out and moving a lot, then you just slowly work it. You look where it's sticking out most, and just evenly push it in, because that's the key. So I hit it there a couple times, I look where it's sticking out a little bit more, I come over here, I'll do the same thing. And once you do that, it should be sitting in there nice and flush and evenly. You can use your finger just to feel around for high spots, and then just slowly tap in those high spots in until it's nice and flush. Doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, but get it pretty close. And then do a quick inspection to make sure it's not this inner lip right here where it seals. Make sure it's not damaged or folded in on itself. And it should look something like this. You'll have to do that for all 4. Alright, so that is how you replace and do the head gaskets on this EJ dual overhead cam Subaru engine. Now, when you do this job, I highly stress to make sure that you get the MLS head gasket, and whatever you do, do not put on the graphite coated head gasket again, because that's the one that causes the failure in the first place. If you put on a graphite coated head gasket, you're just asking for it to fail again, because it will. Eventually that graphite will peel off, and probably another 100,000 miles or kilometers, whatever it is with these Subaru engines, it'll blow again. I would say probably just avoid any coated head gasket. Now personally, I started going with only OEM head gaskets. In the past, I did use a Fel-Pro multi-layered steel head gasket on one of these Subaru engines, because it's supposed to replace the other one. After looking into it a little bit, it seems that those two have issues, and they also have a coating, and I believe from what I've seen online, that coating also fails. So just to be safe, I just avoid any head gaskets now with coatings, and I just try to stick with the OEM multi-layered steel. That one works, so just stick with it, and apparently that's what they put in the turbo models, was the multi-layered steel. So if you have the correct tools and the patience, you can do this job right and correctly. It does take a while, and you want to make sure, of course, that the block is nice and clean, but most importantly that the heads are nice and clean and also flat, because flatness is more important than it being clean. So I recommend that you take your heads to a machine shop, and they'll inspect them, have them inspect them, do a leak down test. They'll clean the head for you, they'll clean the mating surface and get it all done for you. The shop I take it to, they charge me about $82 for both heads to be cleaned and leak down tested, and then the surface machined clean. I don't think they do actual machining on it unless it's warped. They just clean off the surface, get it nice and shiny. That same shop, if you do a rebuild route, which I've done with them as well, where I have the heads rebuilt, they raised their prices recently, but a rebuild for my engine at my shop locally was about $400. That could be different depending on your location. I've seen others say that they pay about $600 to $700 for a rebuild on their heads. So it's all going to depend on your location and your shop. While you're at it, since you have to tear off or open up the intake manifold, take it off the engine to do the head gasket, if you're going to be putting this back in your car, or you're doing this in your car, while you have that off, I highly recommend to replace the O-ring gaskets that are in your cross pipe here, your coolant cross pipe. This is the pipe right here that goes on top of your engine. There's 2 studs here and 2 studs here. I think they're 8 millimeters, but you just pull off these 2 studs and this whole cross pipe pops off your engine, and you should have two O-ring gaskets sitting in there. So take those out and put new ones in, because as these age, and I've had it happen on my engine in my car, they'll start leaking coolant. I did a big job on my Subaru engine. I took it out of the car, I put it in my car, and A couple months later, those O-rings failed and started leaking because they were old. So while you got the engine torn up like this, replace these gaskets right here in your cross pipe. So I hope you all found this video helpful. In the future, there'll be more videos coming out where I continue to do work on this Subaru engine. So there'll be more helpful guides coming soon. Catch you all in the next video.